Okay, so we are moving on, and for this session, thank you so much. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Morna Laing, is the assistant professor of fashion studies at the New School Parsons, Paris. She has published widely on gender and spectatorship, including the monograph featuring the woman child, which was published in 2020. And she also co-edited a volume revisiting the gaze. And current research focuses on the culture of sustainability and will be published in a book entitled Sustainability and the Fashion Media, Spectatorship, Effect, and the Social Change. And the talk today will be on storytelling sustainability, niche fashion media as micro-utopian network.
Thank you. I was going to check first of all that I can master slides. Okay, great. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to the conference organizers, especially Luida and Anastasia, who were so helpful with the logistics of coming here to Yerevan. And today I want to think about the relationship between clothing and utopia, but particularly Jean-Luc's concept of micro-utopian. So clothing has been a feature of utopian thinking since the publication of the Thomas More's text Utopia in 1516, and since then it's been a feature of socialist utopias as well as contemporary fashion practice. So today I want to think about fashion media and the way we can kind of theorize that as a micro-utopian network. So in one sense, the fashion media can be understood as one of the greatest barriers to sustainability in the fashion industry because of practices of greenwashing. And we've heard earlier about how in a way the terminology kind of drapes a green cloak over everything in the industry to the point where it doesn't really mean very much anymore to use the word sustainability. There's a lack of clarity, and all of this kind of contributes to the potential for a dystopian future. But on the other hand, the newness built into fashion can actually be turned on its head, and we can think about how we can use that newness to define fashion differently and kind of coax it in more progressive directions. So we're always going to need to clothe ourselves. So the question is, how can we do fashion differently, and what role media can play in iteratively crafting different definitions, refining definitions, contesting definitions. So really a space for exploring what sustainability could look like when it comes to fashion. So I'm going to return to the word sustainability later because it's incredibly loaded. I want to problematize it a little bit more. But before doing that, I just want to kind of note that the word fashion is itself a contested term, having been used in colonial discourses to signify Western fashion in opposition to dress in indigenous cultures, which is kind of positioned as active and unchanging. So for the purposes of this paper, I'm going to use fashion to refer to all forms of sartorial practice. And on the other hand, I'll use the dominant fashion system to refer to the hegemonic, I guess, economic network and mass-produced fashion in the industry. So to some extent, fashion always involves an element of storytelling, particularly fashion media, which is centered around narrative. And the symbolic production of fashion gives it meaning, and it also legitimates the fashion system in its current formulation. But utopia is also about storytelling. So it's about critiquing the present by imagining society to be different, other than it is. And therefore this element of fantasy and fiction is also found in the concept of utopia, which I'll return to in a little bit. So I included this quote from Donna Haraway just because she really emphasizes how important our choice of stories are when we respond to the climate crisis, and that actually the words and images that we choose matter, and media is obviously a way of disseminating stories, words and images, and so it can play a crucial role in changing the way we think about what fashion is about. I also want to kind of come to this idea of dreaming, and I'm sure we're all familiar with Adorned Dreams, which is one of the founding texts of fashion studies, published in 1985. and where Elizabeth Wilson talks about fashion as an interface between self and society, and a means of expressing ideas, desires, and beliefs. So desires and dreams are closely connected, but in the case of fashion in the West, it's very much connected to the dream world of capitalism and the idea of kind of individualist dreaming in a neoliberal context. So this close connection between fashion and dreaming is sort of at odds with certain discourses on sustainability, because there's a perception often in academic circles as well as in the kind of mainstream that sustainability is a sort of killjoy or like the boring underside of fashion's spectacular front stage. And particularly when we contemplate it through the lens of environment, it can provoke a sense of dread or dryness. And particularly once you start unraveling transnational supply chains and doing lifestyle assessments. So this obviously poses a problem when we think about fashion streaming and sustainability as dreading looking or dry. How can we square this circle? So for me the question is really what our dreams might look like if we could explore fashion from the perspective of citizens rather than consumers, and also whether our dreams are even legible outside of a neoliberal context. So this idea of fleeting, impulsive, individualist dreams, which the capitalist machine likes to produce, we can contrast that with the idea of social dreaming, which is something that John Wood, the design theorist, explores in his book on micro-utopian. So he describes social dreaming as a sort of wise form of dreaming, which involves a deep reflection on the nature of human life. So he goes on to suggest that this sort of deep reflection should actually be a civic duty on the part of each citizen, akin to turning out to vote or paying taxes. And the idea is that there should be plurality in visions, diversity in visions, and that dreams need to be inclusive, heterogeneous, and connectable to our English language, and that one dreamer needs to be sensitive to adjacent dreams. So it's really a plural vision of utopia rather than it being a kind of singular macro-utopian. So this idea of social dreaming is essential in fashion media if we want to make sustainable approaches desirable and try and coax citizens towards the definition of fashion as culture rather than fashion as industry, to borrow a distinction from Alice Hay. However, the symbiotic relationship between fashion media platforms and advertisers is obviously a barrier to this kind of social dreaming and moving beyond the status quo. So the niche fashion media I'm going to be looking at in the course of this presentation has some distance from the industry for that reason. And I'm going to just map a few examples which span media produced within the academy, not-for-profit, media, and magazines that don't depend on advertising revenue. So I argue that these are spaces where social dreaming is already taking place, and in some cases they make explicit reference to the concept of utopia. So I'm looking at English language media, focusing on the period from 2015 onwards. However, I'm also aware that these are niche forms of media, and the climate crisis is certainly not a niche concern. And so in that sense, the concept of micro-utopia again becomes useful because it's about local concrete visions which are nevertheless connected. And in that sense, there's the potential to build a critical mass or a counter-discourse to hegemonic ideas about fashion and even hegemonic ideas about what sustainability means. On that note, in terms of what sustainability means, it's a super loaded term and very complicated, as I'm sure we're all aware. So I just want to untangle a few ideological clusters around which the term tends to gravitate. But before doing that, I just want to acknowledge the idea that I'm drawing from the work of Leslie Thiel, who argues that sustainability is not something that's fixed, that's defined once and then imposed upon a population. It's really something that is iteratively crafted and needs to be crafted in different local contexts. So we want to avoid kind of top-down definition, which is imposed on a population. So in that sense, I like this quotation because he really talks about the work of sustainability happening in tentative yet concrete embodiments of its pursuit. And so this idea of an iterative involving definition in the media is very well placed as a forum in which that can be elaborated. Collectively, given that a lot of magazines are indeed collectively authored. And in that way, stories and images, they're a means of bringing to life quite abstract principles connected with sustainability. But in terms of different discourses, they're multiple and complicated. And I've just done probably quite reductive summary here of the two main ideological poles around which they tend to gravitate. So the first is a mainstream hegemonic definition of sustainability, which is connected with the Development Report and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a vision of sustainability which tries to reconcile the idea of endless economic growth with environmental protection and social equity. So it doesn't challenge the status quo in terms of the economy. So it's an imaginative attempt to make these two things fit together. But the form of equity it proposes a weak form of equity in the sense that it doesn't do enough to redistribute resources, particularly when it comes to people most affected by climate change in the global south. So it's kind of mainstream hegemonic, but it's problematic. The other discourse is more radical and is actually a kind of coming together of lots of different discourses: deep ecology, ecofeminism, intersectional environmentalism, which does critique the status quo and it critiques the neo-colonial world order and it advocates for social justice. So it recognises systems of oppression being kind of bound up in this current system, and actually sustainability needs to take account of those, and redistribution needs to be part of it. But that is a radical discourse. So the micro-utopian examples I talked about today are more aligned with this radical strand than with the kind of hegemonic discourse of sustainable development. And the third discourse, which has come up already today, is greenwash discourse, which is sort of detached from any substantive definition of sustainability. And it's kind of visualized here by the 7 sins of greenwashing, which Yerevan State have published as a way of kind of giving guidance on how to market and do so in a way that doesn't involve greenwashing, and where the legislation is developing. So the Green Claims Code, for example, in the UK, launched in 2021, holds advertisers to account for the claims they make about the environment. So it is changing. So now that we have this sort of rough model of different discourses on sustainability, I just want to introduce the concept of micro-utopia, particularly this idea that niche fashion media can form a micro-utopian discourse. So utopia has been a fruitful concept in fashion culture recently. So there was the 2015 exhibition Utopian Bodies, which took place in Sweden, and sustainability was presented as the most important utopia in that exhibition. But in fashion studies, there's also been work in this area. So, for example, in 2017, Mila Berkekova guest edited an issue of the Utopian Studies journal, which looked at the intersection between fashion and utopia. And in that special issue, there was a piece by Timo Sanin, who took John Reed's concept of micro-utopia and used it to think about fashion design practice. So today I really want to build upon Reed's work, Sanin's work, and actually extend it to think about fashion media as well as design practice, which is what Sanin was talking about. So in terms of the word utopia, I mentioned Thomas More earlier, and it comes from the Greek, as I'm sure many of you are aware, and translates literally as no place or nowhere. So it's an imaginative, fictional place that is used to critique social conditions in the present. So for More, it was an imaginary island off the coast of the Americas, and he used this imaginary island to kind of imagine a society based on logic and kind of communism, but in a way for all of his posturing about egalitarianism. His utopia still featured slavery, and there were distinctions in dress based on marital status and gender binaries. And I think in a way that points to the limits of a singular, universal macro-utopia, which is one person's vision imposed on a society. Which is where, again, the concept of micro-utopia is more useful because it's plural and it's made by diverse social groups in a kind of connectable way. And so avoids that potential totalitarian utopia, which I think, we've seen examples in history of where that's happened. And so for Simon, as I said, his work was really about design. And so he looked at the work of Holly McCullen, who came up earlier in one of the presentations. And in that case, it was really about the utopian ideal that we can eliminate waste. Obviously, one individual person is not capable of doing that. So in the case of Holly McCullen, as a kind of designer, within her sphere of influence, she could come up with zero waste pattern cutting, which eliminated fabric waste from the fashion design that she produced. Crucially, for my purposes, the zero waste patterns were posted on her website and were available open source so that they could be adapted, improved, and developed by other designers. So in a sense, there's a dream, there's a micro-utopia, but it becomes shareable and extended by the fact that it's made available open source. So that leads me in a way to niche fashion media and the idea of niche fashion media as a micro-utopian network. So in a sense, there's many functions of fashion media, showcasing new designers, storytelling, but in a way most commercial media is about stimulating consumption and usually overconsumption, and that's been accelerating, as we know, since the 1970s. So the symbiotic relationship between advertising and mainstream media is a barrier to genuine social dreaming and imagining something beyond what we already have. And this came to the fore in the animal issue of Vogue Italia, which I studied quite recently. And it's an interesting example because it claimed to set out to challenge the anthropocentric nature of the fashion system by allowing animals to occupy the magazines, presenting animal perspectives on the industry. So I thought, wow, that's interesting, particularly given that animal rights are really sidelined in discourses about fashion and sustainability, not only in the industry, but actually also in fashion studies. It's still an underdeveloped perspective. So I looked at this issue, and it could have had the potential to think about the hierarchies between human and non-human animals in quite an imaginative way. But what came to light was the fact that there were strategic silences and omissions, which closed off meaningful parts of the debate, particularly when it came to settings, as well as the critique of the circular economy. So the circular economy is often taken as a synonym for sustainability, but it's really not that simple, but there was no kind of acknowledgement of that. And obviously, Vogue Italia is closely connected to the Italian fashion industry, which is very dependent on leatherwork, and animals are obviously implicated in that system. And so in a way, it was quite a disingenuous issue of the magazine, and I think it really showcases the limits of mainstream media when it comes to talking about sustainability. And just as an aside, it also featured an advertorial for animal fur, which I think is also quite disingenuous when you claim to be challenging the anthropocentrism of the fashion industry. So for me, it was really a failed micro-utopia, even in the first slide it seemed quite interesting. So moving on to niche media, this is an example of a magazine launched in 2008, which claimed to be the first magazine to prioritize sustainability. It's launched by Jamie Perlman, who worked for kind of mainstream fashion magazines previously, and claimed to communicate sustainability from brands to consumer through more conscious storytelling. So we heard earlier that sustainability isn't really about something that can be attained for the price of a product. So already this bridge between consumers and brands is slightly problematic. But it's also a magazine that is bookended by advertising campaigns from, I guess, the usual suspects. So Alice, Selfridges, Celine, Raston. So in that sense already you're compromised in terms of what you're able to say and what you're free to say about the industry and its existing formulation. So in that sense, this critical vacuum in mainstream fashion media is being filled by different outlets and different platforms, and I mentioned a few of those earlier. And the first one I want to mention is fashion media produced within the academy. So in Jo's paper, she mentioned fashion fiction, so I'll refer to it again here, which is a major Holroyd project, and it's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, so obviously not depending on advertising from brands. And it fits with quite a few of the components of micro-utopia that I spoke about earlier. So it's speculative and participative, and invites members of the public to submit their visions of an alternative fashion future. And it does so through creative writing. So in this sense, we're coming back to storytelling and words as a means of responding to planetary instability. And what's nice about it is, as well as this creative writing, there are prototyping workshops and enacting, which make these visions more concrete and realizable. And so it's, in a way, it's a project which is on the website, so again, from digital media. And it presents multiple and competing visions of how fashion could be different. So we're moving from the unthinkable to the thinkable through this form of creative writing, which is submitted by members of the public. And so in that sense, it does align with more radical definitions of sustainability. So she's explicit in the project, she doesn't want to talk about technocentric solutions, she wants to talk about ecocentric solutions. So a lot more based on systems of learning and sharing, which are outside the kind of mainstream economic system. So there's an emphasis on wonder, and again, this idea of imagining an alternative world as a means of critiquing the industry in the present. And like Colleen McQuillan's open source zero waste patterns, the different worlds that people dream up are available under a Creative Commons license, which means that they can be elaborated on and adapted by different people, providing the author is credited for their work. So moving on from that, we can think about another category, which is not-for-profit platforms. I'm sure we're all familiar with Fashion Revolution and their campaign around who made your clothes. They also have a series of zines, which are focused around different themes, including repair, which again is something that we've heard about already today. There's also the Collective, which is based in London, and they harness media as a way of advocating for change with the aim of humanizing clothing through curation, workshops, and insights, and their work is underpinned by their Clean Fashion Manifesto. So in terms of alternative funding models, again, it's not reliant on advertising revenue. They did a crowdfunding campaign in November 2022 and raised over £15,000, which meant that they were not only free from the constraints of advertising, they were also able to pay their contributors. So sustainability is about labour as much as it is about the ecological environment. And I think paying creative intermediaries to actually produce content is part of what a sustainable future looks like. And I think what's interesting in this sense is their journal looks at actually fashion and farming, which seems antithetical at first sight because fashion's been symbolically produced through the urban and the modern. So in that sense, it kind of reconnects consumers with the provenance of their garments. So the Slow Factory, another example, they did an applied utopia residency at CSM recently, and they've also been producing media, including this article by Ursula de Castro on Fashion Revolution, which brings back to this network, so Fashion Revolution being connected to the Slow Factory and sharing ideas in a kind of broader way. And I just want to finish with an advertising-free magazine, which I find really inspiring, which looks at the intersection between climate and culture, including fashion cultures, and doesn't have advertising, and it's visually very engaging. So I think what's nice about this is, and also quite interesting, is it's made by Willow Defragaux, who's one of the co-founders, and he's the editor-in-chief, of the magazine, and he used to work in fashion, so for making three publications like GQ and so on. And in a way, there's a very kind of fashion photography approach to both nature and culture. and it provides sort of visual pleasure and without this pragmatic function of pushing you to buy something. So I know the word disinterested is problematic, but I think compared to fashion magazines, it's a mode of pleasure and visual engagement which doesn't create this impulse to buy the product which is kind of on the pages of the magazine. So I think it's quite inspiring in that sense, and also in terms of nature culture. If you think about the naturalist term of kind of tying knots and the binary separation between these two fields. So as my last slide, I just wanted to return to this quote from Yerevan. I'm thinking about really how we need the process of change, and actually to some extent we need newness and new ways of communicating about sustainability that break through the sort of pervasive veil, which is all over fashion media at the moment. And I think each fashion media is one avenue we can use to reorient that kind of newness, and also to re-signify the concept of fashion, moving away from fashion as industry to fashion as culture. Thank you.